President Joe Biden delivered his State of the Union address last night. And while I recognize, many recognize, speeches are not often Biden's strong suit, especially recently, this was a really good speech, a really, really strong moment, I think, for Biden, and a chance for him, since it seems clear he's going to announce his bid for re-election, to lay out what that re-election campaign will look like, what he feels makes him qualified to have another 4 years as president. And so we'll just start going through first my general takeaways and then dive into so many different clips we have from this. Number one is, I do think it was an embarrassing night for Republicans, and I'll discuss that more with some examples later in this segment, but that was definitely noticeable. The way that I think Biden's tone, Biden's words were being juxtaposed next to the actions or with the actions of the Republican Party, both in the moment and as of recently. And then the tone and his delivery were good, which even if you're saying good words, if you don't have the right delivery, the right tone, that can make a big difference. I think he did a good job of outlining the Democratic Party's successes, the Biden administration's successes, as well as laying out the things that haven't gotten done. And in certain places, making clear the Republican Party should be looked at when we think about why weren't these things successfully gotten through, but then still highlighting bipartisan successes where he was able to work with Republicans. And that was a big part of his campaign message in 2020. So saying, look, I actually did work with Republicans on numerous different large achievements, and that means something as well. And then I think one of the messages I saw floating around in the media kind of responding to this was he's settled in and said this phrase multiple times during the State of the Union on the phrase, let's get the job done. And so for his 2024 campaign message, he likely will kind of have that vibe. I've done a good amount, but we need to get the job done. There's more to do. I recognize that, and let's get it done. The next 2 years, none of these big achievements are going to get done because of the majority of Republicans in the House. But again, for a 2024 re-election bid, that could make some sense. Let's get Democrats back in power in all the places so that they can get the job done. I definitely think that resonates. And one thing I'll say before we actually start watching these clips, and I invite you to stick around for the whole segment, even though it will be long, because there's so many important aspects of this. But what is sad to me is that many will see more or only the responses to a speech like this than the actual speech itself. And so you might tune into right-wing media, and many people today will be experiencing this if they watch conservative media, and it'll be like, here was Joe Biden last night.
Folks, the story of America.
And then he went on to say that he's controlled by the woke mob and he loves China and he's coming for MAGA. And they won't actually give the audience an honest portrayal of what went on last night, which is unfortunate because I think if conservatives approached this speech and others and just policies in general put forward by the Democratic Party with an open mind, they might be surprised that they support a lot of this, because so many of the policies Biden either talked about getting done or laid forward for the future. Not that it's enough. We talk about that a lot. Plenty of critiques, but especially compared to other presidents and of course compared to Republicans, are great policy positions to have and very popular and very common sense. And so if Republicans would watch the full speech with an open mind, stop thinking that, Hunter Biden actually wrote this speech for Joe Biden, you might be surprised that it actually is filled with a lot of things that you would support. Okay, let's start going through the clips. We won't be doing this necessarily in a chronological order, more batches of topics that make sense together that I want to respond to kind of next to each other. So first clip from the speech, you saw the first 2 seconds of it, but this is on the issue of jobs, and we'll start with kind of parts of his speech that we're talking about, things he sees as his successes.
Folks, the story of America is a story of progress and resilience, of always moving forward, of never, ever giving up. It's a story unique among all nations. We're the only country that has emerged from every crisis we've ever entered stronger than we got into it. Look, folks, that's what we're doing again. 2 years ago, the economy was reeling. I stand here tonight after we've created, with the help of many people in this room, 12 million new jobs. More jobs created in 2 years than any president's created in 4 years because of you all.
And as we've talked about in the past, it's not the truth that a president is responsible for all the jobs that are either lost or created. But I do think some things that Biden has done could be kind of connected to those numbers. We were going to see a big recovery after the pandemic, of course. But of course, as well, he will want to take credit for good numbers when they exist. And then on the issue of the Chinese spy balloon, as was quite the obsession within the right wing for a while.
As we made clear last week, if China threatens our sovereignty, we will act to protect our country, and we did.
Pop that thing. He did. And then so many good things on very, I'm trying to think of the exact perfect word, but economic and working class focused and material impacting kind of people's material lives, I should say, in real ways. This is on the issue of surprise medical billing, because sometimes these speeches are so filled with just, as I called, I think it was last night, fluff, just so much fluff about the future of freedom within the purpose of our dream, and just nothing that's attached to what's going to actually change the lives of Americans. And he did a really good job of sticking to the things that will really impact people's lives very significantly and tangibly, I think was the word I was previously trying to think of. And so this is the relating to surprise medical billing. Billy.
They're taking advantage of you, the American consumer. Here's my message to all of you out there. I have your back. We're already preventing Americans from receiving surprise medical bills, stopping $1 billion surprise bills per month so far. We're protecting seniors' life savings by cracking down on nursing homes that commit fraud, endanger patient safety, prescribe drugs that are not needed. Millions of Americans can now save thousands of dollars.
And we'll stop it there, but he continues with a lot of good stuff. And then addressing the fact that many likely in the GOP, want to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act.
Seniors. Well, guess what? Instead of paying $400 or $500 a month, you're paying $15. That's a lot of savings for the federal government. And by the way, why wouldn't we want that? Now, some members here are threatening, and I know it's not an official party position, so I'm going to exaggerate, but threatening to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. As my coach, that's okay, that's fair. As my football coach used to say, lots of luck in your senior year.
So even Kevin McCarthy had to laugh there. I think that was really nicely placed because he didn't say that at the beginning. He waited to say that until after he had walked through all of the incredibly popular and common sense things that the Inflation Reduction Act has done. And then he goes, and people here want to repeal that, which would take away those benefits, which would make you pay more on prescription drugs. And the Republican Party goes, yeah, we want to do that for sure. And so that's another example of the embarrassment in my eyes of the night for Republicans, saying very popular things and they're cheering about the idea of taking those popular things away. And then on the issue of investing in climate change related programs.
Look, the Inflation Reduction Act is also the most significant investment ever in climate change. Ever. Lowering utility bills, creating American jobs, leading the world to a clean energy future. I visited. Look.
And so many of those clean energy provisions also help Americans in tangible ways. This is good. We want to be the country on the cutting edge of green energy and benefit from those jobs, from that technology, from that energy is absolutely beneficial in so many different ways. Okay, then moving on to kind of looking forward, more proposal type stuff, talking about wanting to work with the Republican Party, bipartisanship.
And in fact, I signed over 300 bipartisan pieces of legislation since becoming president, from reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, the Electoral Count Reform Act, the Respect for Marriage Act that protects the right to marry the person you love. And to my Republican friends, if we could work together the last Congress, there's no reason we can't work together and find consensus on important things in this Congress as well.
Again, and kind of a defining part of Biden is his commitment to working with Republicans. So I think him focusing on that is fitting. And of course, while I don't think the Democratic Party needs to compromise in so many ways to work with Marjorie Greene, for example, but there are more reasonable Republicans still in Congress. And we've seen some successes, the infrastructure investment bill, for example, that Republicans were on board with in some part. And I think that's good. And then on the issue of protecting our democracy.
1 million new jobs, more jobs created in 2 years than any president's created in 4 years because of you all, because of the American people. 2 years ago, COVID had shut down, our businesses were closed, our schools were robbed of so much, and today, COVID no longer controls our lives. And 2 years ago, democracy faced its greatest threat to the Civil War. And today, though bruised, our democracy remains unbowed and unbroken.
Unbroken, correct, but hopefully it won't break in the future. And just because we did not lose our democracy in the past and Biden became president and Trump ended up not being successful in his coup attempt, doesn't mean it can't happen in the future. So we need to keep that as a top issue. Then, because it's been such a big subject lately, Biden addressed the fact that Republicans seem, he doesn't say it this way, but in the facts he lays out, makes this point, seem to be ignoring a certain part of the history with the debt.
My administration has cut the deficit by more than $1.7 trillion, the largest deficit reduction in American history. Under the previous administration, the American deficit went up 4 years in a row. Because those record deficits, no president added more to the national debt in any 4 years than my predecessor. Nearly 25% of the entire national debt that took over 200 years to accumulate was added by just one administration alone, the last one. They're the facts. Check it out. Check.
So we have more heckling moments later, but I do love the response being, boo all you want. I'm just telling you the truth. And there's more nuance for sure to the conversation as we went through in the Kevin McCarthy segment yesterday. You can check that out on the YouTube channel about the debt and the deficit. And there's more of a discussion than just comparing numbers because of context, of course. But that's true. And they ignore that part of all of this. So unfortunately, I'm seeing the clock is just tick, tick, ticking. So instead of watching these clips, I'll just summarize real quick a few of these other ones so we can get to the heckling. He called on Republicans to come to the table on immigration reform. As we've talked about, Biden has put forward solutions on investing in our immigration process. Republicans have not gotten on board with it. So they talk about caring about that issue, but they don't actually support solutions. He talked about protecting the lives of LGBTQ people and the rights of LGBTQ people, trans youth specifically, called for a ban on assault weapons, which is absolutely good for him to have done, and recognized the individual who stopped the gunman after killing so many people in California, who was there at the State of the Union, the hero in that situation. He talked about border security, and there was an interesting moment where Ted Cruz was all grumpy about it, even though Ted Cruz acts like he cares about border security. Biden's talking about addressing that issue. He called out the need for the PRO Act to be passed, which is, of course, protecting the rights of unions and the right for workers to unionize, which is infringed on so much by companies, called for the capping of insulin costs for everyone. He did tout his success with Medicare now having insulin costs capped, but everyone who's not in Medicare, who's not a Medicare recipient, doesn't benefit from that. And so it was Republicans who blocked the capping of insulin costs for everyone, and he, of course, is pushing for that to be more universal. Then he talks about infrastructure, which, of course, Trump talked about investing in for so long, but didn't actually do it. Biden has successfully gotten that through. Taxing billionaires, he brought up, which was so wonderful, calling out the wealthy and the ways that especially the tip top individuals, earners, often pay much less, and he listed off, than firefighters and teachers in effective tax rates, and will pay a single-digit tax rate. And so he is hoping to make a change on that. We're not going to get Republicans to get on board with that, unfortunately. And then he acknowledged the family of Tyree Nichols and used that as an opportunity to say that change is necessary with policing in America. But I would say that's a weak point, the way that he messaged that. I think primarily he just didn't spend enough time on police reform, didn't spend enough time on racial justice, criminal justice, kind of just skipped on right through it real quick. So that would be one of the weak parts of his speech, because I don't think he spent enough time or gave it the time it deserved. So that's a few of the moments there, just summarized. Apologies for having to skip through that. Now let's quickly look at the most embarrassing parts for Republicans when they are heckling Biden. And it actually made Biden look like kind of the adult in the room, I think.
Fentanyl is killing more than 70,000 Americans a year. You got it.
So he's talking about fentanyl, and someone shouts, "It's your fault." And of course, as we've talked about, as I just mentioned with immigration, number one, we saw the fentanyl start spiking and how much was getting into the United States at the end of Trump's presidency. It's clearly a larger conversation than just Biden being president. And he's put forward solutions that wouldn't necessarily solve the problem, but to start to try to address the crisis that we're in on that front. And Republicans aren't interested in solutions. They love fear-mongering about the problem. And he did outline some of, or mention some of those solutions during the speech. And then here's another heckling moment.
Instead of making the wealthy pay their fair share, some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority. Let me give you, anybody who doubts it, contact my office. I'll give you a copy. I'll give you a copy of the proposal.
There's Marjorie Greene in her massive winter coat.
That means Congress doesn't vote. Well, I'm glad to see you. No, I tell you, I enjoy conversion. You know, it means if Congress doesn't keep the programs the way they are, they'd go away. Other Republicans say, I'm not saying it's a majority of you. I don't even think it's even a significant, but it's being proposed by individuals. I'm not politely not naming them, but it's being proposed by some of you. Look, folks.
Okay. Bunch of people calling him a liar. So from that reaction, even if you're someone who generally doesn't trust the Republican Party, you're probably thinking, okay, was he lying in that moment? Was he? No. He's talking about Medicare and Social Security being sunsetted, them sunsetting. Where does that come from? Well, Republican Senator Rick Scott, you can go to the website. It's called the Rescue America Plan, and he has a 12-point plan to rescue America. And in this 12-point plan, as I have on screen for our video viewers, all federal legislation sunsets in 5 years. Or Medicare and Social Security, federal legislation, yes, now law, of course. But if a law is worth keeping, Congress can pass it again, he says. So this would require Congress to repass Medicare and Social Security every 5 years. Gosh, in the midst of this debt ceiling debacle, something that seems absolutely necessary to get done that is being threatened right now, it's really hard to imagine that they would possibly threaten Medicare and Social Security. Of course, sunsetting every federal program does put at risk Medicare and Social Security. That's exactly what Biden referenced. And then just here's another example, this one of Republican Representative Michael Waltz saying, we need to look at entitlements if we really want to address balancing the budget.
Is on the march. And oh, by the way, we still have a global terrorist state now in Afghanistan, thanks to Joe Biden. So this is, I mean, we can work on prioritizing defense spending, but that's really nibbling around the margins. Okay. If we really want to talk about the debt and spending, it's the entitlements program that's 70% of our entire budget. That 1.7 trillion and defense within that is only 30%. So if we want to talk about big reforms, I look forward to hearing that from those folks who are pushing towards a balanced budget.
So because it's so sensitive of a subject, they'll never use the words Medicare and Social Security, but entitlements are what we call programs like that. And he's saying, yeah, defense, there's money there, but if we really want to talk about reform, entitlements is where we need to go. And so Biden was being 100% correct there, and the Republican Party needs to stop screaming at Biden, turn around and talk to the people in their own party who are putting this forward. Last thing we'll look at, sorry, I know this clip has gone so long. Usually I don't do segments for this long, but so much to talk about. Here's a CNN flash poll after the State of the Union saying a 72% majority of Americans who watched President Joe Biden's State of the Union address had a positive reaction to the speech, according to a CNN poll conducted by SSRS, with a smaller 34% reacting very positively. So a 72% positive response, that's good. Biden's poll numbers are obviously far below that, meaning a lot of people who don't approve of his presidency generally approved of that speech. And I think it's because he focused on the issues. As I said, he focused on tangible things that will help the lives of working people. And that's what people want to hear. And so hopefully the promises he made, or maybe not promises, but proposals he's pushing for, he'll be successful in. Sorry if I missed things from that speech. You saw there's a lot to go through. And I think highlighting the successes of his presidency is important. It's not to say, oh my gosh, it's just the best thing ever. I wish we could get more, but with the reality of the political landscape that exists as of now, I think it's been pretty successful within that context, and that speech was definitely very strong. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments. I've gotten people asking, and I was going to pull up, but I can't do it now, the username of someone who said, I don't know if you read comments. Every single comment gets read by someone who is involved in the show, and producer Ben is super good at making that happen, and then is constantly sending me ones that he feels are highlights, whether that's because they're really sweet or because they're really horrible or an interesting question. So absolutely leave a comment, and very good chance it will get read. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to be a part of what makes this show possible, plus get access to the full video version of the show hours before all the clips are uploaded to YouTube, plus get the full bonus show every single Saturday, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Luke Beasley. That's patreon.com/Luke Beasley. Link in the description.